It's one thing to lose yourself in the Hollywood dream. It's another to watch your heroes nearly lose their lives chasing something much darker. The secret addictions of classic stars weren't just tabloid fodder. They were ticking time bombs, hiding in plain sight, destroying icons from the inside out. So what does it really cost to shine that bright under the spotlight? Ever wonder how many legends came one step away from disaster while the world applauded? Brace yourself. The real story isn't what you think. Judy Garland. Forget the rainbows and ruby slippers. If there was ever a poster child for how Hollywood eats its young, it was Judy Garland. The studio called her the little girl with the big voice. But off camera, MGM was feeding her something far more sinister. A cocktail of amphetamines and barbiturates that would fuel a decades-long addiction and a heartbreak the public never saw coming. Garland's nightmare started long before the world even knew her name. Signed to MGM as a teenager, she was immediately trapped in a web of studio experts who micromanaged every inch of her life. Diet pills for breakfast, sleeping pills for dessert, all to keep her performing relentlessly. And the price? A growing dependency that would haunt her for the rest of her short, tragic life. By the time she sang her last notes as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, her addiction was already headline material in studio backrooms. But Judy's private hell was carefully disguised behind million-dollar smiles and glittering premieres. The studio needed her working, no matter the cost. Garland became a one-woman industry, pulling in millions. Yet her own finances were a disaster, lost to bad contracts, endless generosity, and failed marriages. She fought to keep up the facade, juggling concert tours, television, and the occasional hit film. The world cheered her comebacks, like the legendary Carnegie Hall concert. But behind the scenes, her demons were gaining ground. The real heartbreak? Even at her lowest, Judy was surrounded by people who needed her to keep going. So the prescriptions kept coming, the performances never stopped, and the price kept rising. In the end, Garland's accidental overdose at age 47 felt less like a shock and more like a cruel inevitability. The studio that made her also destroyed her. Her addiction wasn't just a dirty secret. It was Hollywood's open wound, festering in the glare of the spotlight. Judy Garland's story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a brutal reminder of how fame can turn the brightest light into the quickest burnout. And yet, the world keeps singing her songs, almost pretending the pain wasn't part of the package. Robert Walker. If Robert Walker looked haunted on screen, it's because the darkness was real and never left him alone. Known for his chilling performance as Bruno Anthony in Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, Walker was the all-American boy with a smile that could sell movie tickets and a vulnerability that made audiences root for him. But what the fans didn't see was the devastating cocktail of heartbreak and alcohol quietly taking over his life, one failed promise at a time. Walker's slide into addiction started not with Hollywood, but with a broken heart. He fell head over heels for fellow actor Phyllis Isley, better known as Jennifer Jones, and built his world around her. When studio mogul David Selznick discovered Jones and orchestrated her rise, he also orchestrated her exit from Walker's life. The divorce hit Walker like a freight train. Suddenly, the boy next door was lost, and Hollywood was never great at helping lost souls find their way back. What followed was a slow-motion unraveling that no studio could script away. Walker kept getting solid roles, see here, Private Hargrove and The Clock among them. But his drinking became legendary, the kind of off-duty disaster that made directors nervous. He wasn't the angry drunk. He was the guy who disappeared into his own pain, numbing every wound with another glass. By the time he took on the role of Bruno, he was living on the edge, flipping between brilliance and breakdown from one day to the next. Walker's addiction was both public and invisible, a problem everyone whispered about, but nobody knew how to fix. Hospital stays became routine, but the treatment never stuck. The night he died, at just 32, was pure old Hollywood tragedy. A psychiatrist gave him a sedative to calm a breakdown, not knowing Walker already had enough alcohol in his system to tip the balance. Official cause? Accidental overdose. But anyone paying attention saw a man undone by grief, addiction, and a system that cheered until the last curtain fell. Robert Walker never got his Hollywood ending. His secret addiction was the role he never auditioned for, and the one that stole the spotlight for good. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift wasn't just another pretty face. He was the original tortured genius, the brooding idol who rewrote the rules of screen acting. But the same sensitivity that made him magnetic on camera turned his private life into a storm of painkillers, booze, and relentless self-destruction. If Clift's performances felt raw and real, it's because he was constantly at war with the world and himself. Clift's trouble didn't start in Hollywood, but the city's pressures threw gasoline on his personal fire. Early on, he refused to play by the old studio rules. He wasn't interested in the carefully manicured leading man routine. He dove deep, made everything personal, and let his wounds show. That authenticity brought him instant stardom. Red River, A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity. But the price was chronic, gnawing anxiety that he could never shake. Then came the crash. In 1956, after leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, Clift smashed his car into a telephone pole just up the street. Taylor herself reportedly pulled his broken teeth from his throat at the scene. The studios patched up his face, but they couldn't patch up the soul. After the accident, the pain was relentless, physically and emotionally. The scripts kept coming, but Clift wasn't the same. Neither was his addiction. The painkillers that dulled his agony also stole his spark, and the bottle made the rest of the world fade into static. What's wild is how long Clift managed to work, staggering through performances that still stunned audiences, even as his health crumbled. He became infamous for disappearing, slurring lines, or simply vanishing into himself between takes. The world called it the longest suicide in Hollywood history, a tragedy that played out in slow motion while the industry looked away. Montgomery Clift died at just 45, a heart attack brought on by years of abuse, painkillers, and bottomless vodka bottles. He left behind a blueprint for the modern tortured artist, a legacy of brilliance and misery. If Hollywood sold broken dreams, Clift was both its best customer and its most haunting warning. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton was Hollywood's ultimate cautionary tale, a bombshell whose beauty could stop traffic, but whose secrets ran darker than any film noir. She burst onto the scene with a ferocity that made studio heads swoon and gossip columnists salivate. But while her career looked like it was rocketing skyward, Payton was already on a collision course with disaster, thanks to addictions that ate away at her life like acid. What started as hard partying soon spiraled into a full-blown dependence on alcohol and drugs. The Hollywood nightlife was relentless, and Barbara dove in headfirst, loving every wild, unfiltered minute. But the real poison was her inability to draw boundaries, romantically or chemically. Caught in a scandalous love triangle with Franchot Tone and Tom Neal, Payton's off-screen drama became as famous as any role she played. When Neal famously beat Tone nearly to death over her, studios recoiled. The message was clear. She was now Hollywood's most radioactive leading lady. As the offers dried up, Barbara's vices filled the void. She moved from gin to pills, to anything that could numb the pain. She bounced from one seedy hotel to the next, her once glamorous face becoming unrecognizable in the harsh light of day. Studio execs who'd once promised her the world now crossed the street to avoid her. By the mid-1950s, Payton was taking whatever work she could get, starring in B-movies and even dabbling in prostitution just to pay for her next fix. It wasn't just her career that crumbled. Friends abandoned her, family watched in horror, and Payton herself seemed resigned to the nightmare. Her final act? A brutally honest memoir, I Am Not Ashamed. in which she chronicled her rise and fall with a mix of candor and heartbreak that only made her story sting more. Barbara Payton died at 39, her body ravaged by years of abuse. Hollywood loves a comeback, but in Barbara's case, her secret addictions wrote an ending no one could rewrite. In a city built on illusions, she became a ghost, the glamorous siren who lost herself to the darkness. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra, Old Blue Eyes himself, wasn't just a singer. He was the very definition of swagger. But while his public persona was all smooth tuxedos and Rat Pack charm, his private life was a high-wire act perched above a bottomless glass. Sinatra's addiction wasn't some back-alley secret. It was poured neat and served in every club from Vegas to New York. And for years, it nearly cost him everything he'd built. The world saw Sinatra as untouchable, a crooner with connections, a movie star with mob ties, a guy whose friends were as famous as his enemies were dangerous. But Frank's real nemesis was alcohol, and he never saw it coming. It was his comfort during heartbreak, his fuel for late-night parties, and his shield against the pressures of relentless fame. The more he drank, the more erratic he became. Friends whispered, rivals cheered, and journalists learned to duck when Frank's temper got the better of him. The booze fueled legendary outbursts. There were brawls in nightclubs, public dust-ups with reporters, and infamous feuds that kept the tabloids in business. Even his love life was set to a boozy soundtrack. His stormy marriage to Ava Gardner was a case study in passion and destruction, with alcohol often the third party in the relationship. After their split, Sinatra's drinking hit new lows, dragging his career down with it. Gigs dried up, record sales tanked, and the studios lost interest. But if Frank knew how to crash, he also knew how to climb back. He pulled off one of Hollywood's greatest comebacks with From Here to Eternity. But his habits never truly left him. The bottle always lingered, and the rumors of mob entanglements made sure that even at his peak, danger was never far away. Frank Sinatra's addiction may not have killed him outright, but it put everything he valued on the line: reputation, career, even friendships with presidents. In the end, he walked away a legend, but only after dancing dangerously close to the edge for decades. The chairman of the board never let you see him sweat. But make no mistake, he knew exactly how close the fall could be. Veronica Lake. When Veronica Lake swept her iconic peekaboo hair across one eye, she became an instant sensation, the cool, aloof goddess of film noir. But beneath the glossy waves and icy blue stare, Lake was fighting a battle nobody wanted to see. Her secret? A growing addiction to alcohol started as a social lubricant and ended up as her cruelest critic. Hollywood had big plans for Lake. She was cast opposite Alan Ladd in one sultry noir after another, her trademark hairstyle inspiring millions of imitators. But with fame came pressure, and Veronica was never built for Hollywood's factory model. Directors found her unpredictable, co-stars grumbled about her lateness, and studio execs alternated between fawning over her and tearing her down behind closed doors. As the pressure mounted, Lake's drinking became less a party trick and more of a survival tool. By the mid-1940s, Veronica's dependence was impossible to hide. She missed call times, stumbled over lines, and fought with almost everyone on set. Paramount, the very studio that built her, finally gave up and dropped her contract. The fall was fast and merciless. 1 minute, Lake was the hottest thing in Hollywood. The next, she was working stage shows and taking whatever film scrap she could find. Lake's personal life fared no better. She cycled through marriages and burned through her fortune at a shocking rate. Her finances were in shambles, her career was dead, and the woman once voted most photogenic was now tending bar in a low-rent Manhattan hotel just to survive. It was a humiliation Hollywood barely noticed. For them, she'd become yesterday's problem. Veronica Lake's final years were a lesson in how quickly the town forgets its icons. She tried to stage a comeback, but addiction is a ruthless editor. It cut her scenes before she could even audition. By the time she died in 1973, she was almost unrecognizable, a ghostly figure in her own legend. Lake's story isn't just a Hollywood tragedy. It's a blueprint for how the industry glamorizes the breakdown, then changes the channel when the fallout gets real. Underneath that peekaboo wave was a woman who couldn't hide from herself, no matter how hard she tried. Mickey Rooney. If there was ever a star who seemed impossible to break, it was Mickey Rooney. He was Hollywood's golden boy, the scrappy kid with a mile-wide grin who headlined more films than most actors could dream of. But underneath all that charm, Mickey was living on a razor's edge, addicted not to a substance, but to the thrill of the gamble, and it nearly left him with nothing. Rooney's run as America's favorite teenager made him richer than most movie moguls. He earned millions, then watched it vanish at the racetrack, the poker table, or on whatever wild long shot he convinced himself would hit next. The studios paid him handsomely, but for Mickey, the real action was always somewhere just out of reach, usually on the next bet. His addiction to gambling didn't come with the dramatic scenes of drunken meltdowns or public intoxication. Instead, it played out in bank statements, "I owe us," and frantic phone calls to friends and family. Mickey would blow through a fortune in a night and wake up the next day ready to do it all over again. When his movie career lost steam, he tried everything: TV, stage, even dinner theater, to keep the cash flowing. But the money never stuck around. It didn't help that his personal life was just as reckless as his bets. 8 marriages, each messier than the last, with legal battles and expensive divorces draining what little he managed to save. To make matters worse, in his later years, those closest to him, his own family, allegedly manipulated him, stole from him, and left him nearly penniless. In a gut-wrenching scene late in life, Rooney testified before Congress about being financially abused, his once lavish lifestyle reduced to counting every penny. When Rooney died, the man who'd once been the world's top box office draw had an estate valued at less than the price of a classic convertible. His addiction wasn't hidden in a bottle. It was written in red ink and broken promises. Mickey Rooney's fall is proof that in Hollywood, sometimes the biggest losses don't come from drugs or booze, but from the thrill of risking it all and losing. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi didn't just play monsters. He battled his own demons, and they were far scarier than anything Hollywood could dream up. The man behind the most iconic Dracula in cinema history should have enjoyed a long, comfortable ride on his velvet cape. Instead, Lugosi's life turned into a real-life horror story, fueled by morphine, methadone, and a Hollywood that only wanted him when the lights were low and the makeup was thick. Lugosi's addiction story started, as so many do, with pain. Chronic health issues, physical and psychological, sent him searching for relief. And in the 1940s, that often meant a prescription for whatever would make the agony go away. Morphine was the ticket, and it didn't take long before the line between medical necessity and dependency blurred. Soon, Lugosi was chasing the dragon harder than any vampire chased a vein. The tragedy? While other horror legends like Boris Karloff reinvented themselves, Lugosi got trapped, typecast as the eternal ghoul, hired for pennies, and left behind when the next big thing came along. His once commanding presence was reduced to campy cameos and low-budget productions, with paychecks that barely covered his next fix. The same Hollywood that cheered his chilling performance in Dracula couldn't be bothered when he filed for bankruptcy or begged for another gig. By the 1950s, the morphine and methadone had done their work. Lugosi's finances were shot, his reputation was a punchline, and his physical health had collapsed. In a rare moment of honesty, he checked himself into rehab, making headlines as one of the first major stars to publicly seek treatment for addiction. But by then, the damage was done. Bela Lugosi died with little more than a handful of dollars and a trunk full of old costumes. The irony? He was buried in his Dracula cape, forever tied to a role that brought him both fame and ruin. His secret addiction wasn't just a footnote. It was the real curse that haunted him to the grave, and a warning that not all monsters live on the screen. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge was the kind of trailblazer Hollywood loves to celebrate, at least on paper. She was the first black woman to be nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, a true icon whose beauty and talent demanded attention in an industry hell-bent on ignoring her. But what the magazines didn't print was the crushing weight she carried, a private agony medicated with pills and alcohol that chipped away at her spirit until it all fell apart. Dandridge's rise was a miracle in itself. She danced and sang her way from the Dandridge Sisters musical act all the way to starring roles in films like Carmen Jones. But when the applause faded, so did the opportunities. Hollywood, still steeped in racism, shoved her into a corner, offering nothing but stereotypical roles or outright disrespect. Every door that should have opened became another reminder of how much the system wanted her to fail. The personal heartbreaks piled up. Her marriage to Harold Nicholas was a disaster, and her daughter Carolyn was born with severe brain damage, a responsibility and sorrow Dorothy bore almost entirely alone. As the pressures mounted, Dandridge turned to prescription drugs and alcohol. They offered a numbing escape from the pain of rejection, financial ruin, and relentless discrimination. Money slipped through her fingers thanks to greedy managers and years of being underpaid. Bankruptcy followed, her home was lost, and even her health began to decline. By her early 40s, Dandridge was living in near obscurity, her phone no longer ringing. Her audience moved on to the next discovery. The final blow came when she was found dead in her apartment at just 42. The official cause, an overdose of antidepressants, though whispers of suicide have haunted her legacy ever since. Dorothy Dandridge broke barriers, but the world broke her right back. Her secret addictions were both the result and the symptom of a Hollywood that refused to see her worth. She remains a legend, but her story is a warning. Even pioneers aren't safe from the industry's sharpest knives. William Holden. William Holden was the kind of star Hollywood was built to worship. Handsome, charismatic, and impossibly cool. He won an Oscar, headlined classics like Sunset Boulevard and Stalag 17, and spent decades as the leading man everyone else envied. But beneath that polished exterior, Holden's life was slowly coming undone, glass by glass. His real scene partner wasn't a glamorous co-star. It was a bottle, and their relationship nearly killed him. Holden's addiction wasn't the wild, tabloid-friendly chaos of some of his peers. He was quieter, a slow erosion masked by years of professional discipline and public charm. But make no mistake, the drinking was always there, lurking at rap parties, private dinners, or nights spent alone on distant location shoots. Friends described a man who withdrew into himself, turning to alcohol to fill the space fame could never quite satisfy. He wasn't the life of the party. He was the guy who disappeared into the shadows, just him and the bottle. As the years rolled by, Holden's habit became impossible to ignore. Directors grumbled about his unreliability, producers fretted about insurance, and old friends watched in helpless frustration as one of their own faded before their eyes. He managed to stage a comeback in the 1970s, winning new acclaim for network, but the demons were never far behind. Holden's relationships, especially with Audrey Hepburn and Brenda Marshall, cracked under the pressure, leaving him increasingly isolated. The tragedy reached its peak in 1981. Alone in his Santa Monica apartment, Holden, deep in his cups, slipped, hit his head on a nightstand, and bled to death, unable to call for help. His body wasn't found for days. The end was as lonely as it was senseless, and the headlines were brutal. Another legend lost to addiction. William Holden remains one of Hollywood's most magnetic stars, but his secret was always right there on the rocks. He didn't go out in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet, heartbreaking fade. His talent finally no match for the addiction that dogged him for decades. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer had everything Hollywood could want: striking looks, undeniable talent, and a rebellious streak that set her apart from the cookie-cutter starlets of her era. But sometimes, the very things that make you special are the same things that destroy you. For Farmer, her fierce independence, coupled with a growing dependence on alcohol and psychiatric drugs, turned her life into one of Hollywood's most infamous tragedies. Farmer's career took off fast in the late 1930s. She wowed critics in films like Come and Get It, and seemed destined for superstardom. But Frances never played by the rules, and Hollywood hates a wild card. She clashed with studio execs, scoffed at publicity stunts, and flat out refused to fake smiles for the cameras. The tabloids painted her as difficult and unstable, and the rumors only fed the pressure. To cope with the mounting stress, Farmer turned to alcohol, a crutch that offered quick relief but brought mounting chaos. Her outbursts became public, and after a string of legal troubles, she was committed to a mental institution. The real horror story began there. Decades of rumored abuse, electroshock therapy, and endless sedatives. Some say she even endured a lobotomy, though that claim remains shrouded in legend and speculation. When Farmer was finally released, she tried to claw her way back, taking small TV roles, hosting a local talk show, and writing about her experiences. But Hollywood's memory is short, and the world had already moved on. The years of institutionalization and substance abuse left her battered and fragile. Alcohol remained a constant companion, and the comeback she so desperately wanted always stayed just out of reach. Frances Farmer died at 56, her legacy a heartbreaking what if. The studio machine that built her up was the same one that crushed her spirit, and her addiction was both symptom and sentence. In an industry obsessed with reinvention, Farmer's story stands out as a brutal reminder. Sometimes, no matter how much talent you have, the house always wins. Rita Hworth. Rita Hworth was the very image of old Hollywood glamour, a goddess in shimmering gowns, lighting up screens in films like Gilda and CoverGirl. She was the woman every man wanted, and every woman wanted to be. But behind the dazzling smile and the electrifying dance numbers, Rita was quietly losing a war with herself, one drink at a time. Hworth's transformation into a star was as carefully orchestrated as any Hollywood myth. Studio bosses changed her name, altered her hairline with painful electrolysis, and dyed her hair a fiery red. The new Rita was a sensation, but the real woman felt like she was disappearing. Off camera, Rita battled loneliness, heartbreak, and the crushing weight of impossible expectations. She endured a carousel of failed marriages, including headline-making unions with Orson Welles and Prince Ali Khan, each one leaving her more isolated and anxious. The press only saw the parties and the premieres. What they missed was the bottle she reached for when the guests went home. Alcohol became Rita's shield against disappointment and betrayal. It numbed the pain, but it also dulled her shine. As the years went on, her drinking worsened. Directors began to notice her slipping, forgetting lines, missing cues. She was dismissed as difficult, then as washed up, and eventually the offers dried up. The public wrote it off as just another aging starlet losing her touch. But there was more going on. Rita's memory lapses and erratic behavior were actually early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, a condition almost nobody understood at the time, and which the press cruelly misdiagnosed as pure alcoholism. Hworth's final decades were marked by poverty, confusion, and heartbreaking decline. Her fortune vanished through mismanagement and medical bills, leaving her dependent on her daughter and old friends. By the time she died in 1987, Hollywood had all but forgotten the woman who once defined beauty on the silver screen. Rita Hworth's addiction, and the disease hiding behind it, remains one of the most tragic stories in film history. A goddess fallen, not by scandal, but by secrets no one could see until it was too late. Dana Andrews. Dana Andrews was the kind of actor who made stoicism look sexy, a soft-spoken heartthrob with a jawline carved from ambition. He owned the screen in classics like Laura and The Best Years of Our Lives. But behind those steady eyes was a secret struggle that almost nobody in 1940s America wanted to talk about. While audiences saw a reliable, masculine hero, Dana was locked in a relentless battle with alcoholism that shadowed every step of his career. Andrews wasn't your typical Hollywood wild man. He was disciplined, sharp, and for years, he kept his addiction under wrap, even from his family. His routine was famously strict. He'd show up on set ready to work, lines memorized, every tie knotted perfectly. But as soon as the cameras stopped rolling, the real performance began. Drink by drink, he was numbing the anxieties of fame, perfectionism, and the creeping sense that the world he'd conquered was about to move on without him. In the 1950s, the cracks began to show. The drinking that had once been a tightly guarded secret became impossible to hide. Directors grew frustrated with his forgotten lines, slurred speech, and unpredictable mood swings. The work dried up. One of Hollywood's top-earning actors was now scrounging for TV gigs and bit parts, desperately trying to keep his name alive while his addiction drained his finances and nearly wrecked his marriage. But here's what set Andrews apart. He eventually faced his demons head-on. In the late 1960s, at a time when rehab was a dirty word in Hollywood, Dana got sober and then spoke out, hoping his story might help others. It was too late for a full comeback, but it was the kind of honesty that most stars ran from. Dana Andrews lived out his later years in quiet obscurity, a real estate agent in the Valley, his Hollywood heyday just a memory. His addiction didn't kill him, but it stole the best years of his life. And for that, there's no studio rewrite. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn was Hollywood's original bad boy, the reckless, dashing hero who leapt off castle walls and into 1,000 tabloids. On screen, he was every kid's idea of a perfect rogue, from Captain Blood to the adventures of Robin Hood. But Flynn's true danger wasn't a sword fight. It was the ceaseless storm of alcohol and morphine that followed him from set to seedy after-party, and, eventually, to the edge of oblivion. Flynn's appetites were legendary, even by Golden Age standards. He lived fast and loud, burning through fortunes on yachts, women, and endless parties. The phrase "in like Flynn" became cultural shorthand for wild, consequence-free living. But the parties masked a deeper pain. Flynn used alcohol and drugs to escape boredom, insecurity, and a creeping sense that the real world was never as exciting as his own legend. By the late 1940s, the charming adventurer was becoming a Hollywood punchline. Flynn's looks began to fade, his body battered by years of excess. He was showing up drunk to sets, picking fights, and taking any role that would pay enough to keep the party going. Morphine entered the picture as a remedy for mounting physical pain, but only made things worse. His legendary energy was gone, replaced by a sullen, unpredictable shell of his former self. Desperate for cash, Flynn sold off his most prized possessions, including his beloved yacht, and even penned a no-holds-barred memoir, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, that laid bare the chaos and charm of his life. It became a bestseller, but the royalties couldn't rescue him from his own worst habits. Flynn died at just 50, in a small Vancouver apartment, his once heroic body ravaged by cirrhosis, heart disease, and addiction. His bank account was empty, his reputation battered, and the world he'd once dazzled barely took notice. Hollywood remembers him as the ultimate swashbuckler, but the real Flynn was a man adrift, lost to the very vices he made look so glamorous. In the end, the only thing he couldn't outrun was himself. Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd was Hollywood's answer to stoic masculinity, a man of few words, with glacier blue eyes and a simmering intensity that lit up every film noir he touched. As the star of Shane and This Gun for Hire, Ladd's image was one of quiet power. But away from the spotlight, his silence hid a battle with alcohol and painkillers that turned his final years into a slow-motion tragedy. Ladd's childhood was a tough luck story: poverty, an absent father, and a lifelong sense of being less than. His short stature in a town obsessed with tall leading men didn't help his self-esteem, and no matter how many box office hits he delivered, Ladd always seemed to be fighting a private war for acceptance. When old injuries started to haunt him, doctors reached for the era's universal remedy: pills. Add in a growing reliance on alcohol, and Ladd's armor started to crack. The studio system did him no favors. As the golden age gave way to the gritty realism of the late 50s and 60s, roles for traditional tough guys dried up. Ladd, already reeling from chronic pain and insecurity, found comfort in a prescription bottle and a steady supply of whiskey. Friends watched in helpless frustration as he cycled through stints in rehab, brief recoveries, and inevitable relapses. By the early 1960s, Ladd's decline was impossible to hide. He was missing work, slurring lines, and sinking into depression. The once unbreakable cowboy of Shane was now haunted by the ghosts of what might have been. In 1964, Alan Ladd was found unconscious at home, a fatal mix of alcohol and sedatives finally putting an end to the fight. He died at 50, much of his fortune gone, his stardom eclipsed by his private pain. Alan Ladd's addiction was the kind of secret Hollywood never wanted on the marquee, a silent struggle that ended, as so many do, behind closed doors, with only a whisper of the legend he once was. So what do you think? Were any of these secrets more shocking than the scandals splashed across the headlines? In Hollywood, the most dangerous addictions are the ones that stay just out of frame, chipping away at the legends we thought could never fall. Which story stuck with you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want more hidden Hollywood history, hit like and subscribe. After all, behind every icon, there's always another secret waiting to be told.